It does two things. First of all, it uses quite advanced machine learning to predict the outcome of a clinical trial before that clinical trial even starts. It's based on the way that the trial's set up. The second thing that it does is it helps pharmaceutical companies and biotechs design better clinical trials. There's a real problem here that 90% of clinical trials fail. Some low-hanging trials, there's some low-hanging fruit that can easily be addressed with a product like TrialKey, because there's been $40 million spent on a phase 2 pivotal trial. What we try to do is isolate those problems up front so that you get a trial protocol, a design for a clinical trial that is most likely to succeed.
Clinical trials are a triple threat. They're slow, they're expensive, and often they fail. But AI is changing that, and TrialKey is the trailblazer leading the charge. It's leveraging machine learning to solve some of the biggest challenges in drug discovery and design. But how does it actually work? And can AI be trusted in these life or death experiments? Stick around to the end as we explore the endless opportunities for AI and digital twins. You won't want to miss this conversation. Let's start with, what is TrialKey?
The easiest way that I can describe what TrialKey does is it does two things. First of all, it uses quite advanced machine learning to predict the outcome of a clinical trial before that clinical trial even starts. It's based on the way that the trial's set up, the technology is being used, etc. So that's the first thing it does. The second thing that it does is it helps pharmaceutical companies and biotechs design better clinical trials. There's a real problem here that 90% of clinical trials fail. They don't go through all the stages. I think there's only 50 drugs that are approved every year by the FDA, and we spend something like $100 billion in medical research. So there's a real, if I go back to my economics days, there's a market failure here, and products like TrialKey can help shift that curve so that we get more trials that succeed, more drugs that get approved, or more devices that get approved, and get a better allocation of capital and a better result for patients as well.
I really like that efficiency piece, and working in pharma, I do see it. I do see big drugs, loads of money spent, and unfortunately, flops.
And they don't need to flop because, using a big data AI approach, we found that 60% of trials have serious design flaws that could have easily been addressed using this AI approach. It might be as simple as optimizing on patient numbers in a trial, or it might be something really complex in the inclusion-exclusion criteria that you could just tinker with to improve your chance of success, or it might be primary endpoints you're looking at. Without going into the specifics of clinical trial, there's some low-hanging fruit that could easily be addressed with a product like TrialKey.
Yeah, it sounds phenomenal. And if I take my experience where I worked on a class of drugs, I'm happy to share the class actually, CDK4/6 inhibitors for breast cancer.
Ah, right, yes.
3 of them in the same class, but one of the particular 3 read out negative in 3 landmark trials.
Right.
And it led to the other 2 kind of taking off and
Yeah.
it sort of being taken back. And obviously it took a huge hit, and clinicians would always, so I worked in oncology, I'd see the oncologist and I just don't understand. They're the same class. How come this one has failed to reach its primary endpoint?
Yeah.
The other 2, and I often do hear that, like the staunch loyalists to that particular product will be like, it's trial design. I still believe in it. Or others will be like, no, that drug's bad. I can't use that. Medico-legal, I'll be sued if I use that. And so it's interesting. I know the golden sin is never to cross-trial compare, but clinicians would say to us, the reason why that failed is because inclusion criteria, it was silly. It included a too broad a population.
Yeah.
That's what TrialKey is doing, from what I'm hearing.
And that sort of, what you just mentioned then is usually done retrospectively, which is a big problem, right? Because there's been $40 million spent on a phase 2 pivotal trial. What we try to do is isolate those problems up front so that you get a trial protocol, a design for a clinical trial that is most likely to succeed, right? It's not saying that it's going to succeed because there's so much uncertainty still in drug discovery, but we're giving it the best chance of succeeding. And I know we're going to talk about rare conditions later, but improving that success rates will get more trials funded, which includes funding rare conditions, etc. as well. So there's a lot of positives to using AI. There's some skepticism and some negatives, but overall I think the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe to that point on rare diseases, it's very difficult to recruit for rare disease trials given it's a rare disease. There's not many patients out there. I think there's fewer than 100 clinical trials in the sort of published domain. How does TrialKey address that? Based on what you said before, it sort of pulls together multiple trials, but if there's not a strong sample size to pull from, how does it actually then predict successful outcomes?
Yeah, great question. So this is one of the major objections that we get for using something like TrialKey in rare diseases. Your model's based on a training set. If there aren't many rare conditions within that, if there aren't many trials for rare conditions within that training set, how can it provide recommendations? Well, it turns out that what I call trial execution variables, like things like how many patients do you need, how many sites, where should they be located, what are your inclusion, exclusion criteria, primary, secondary endpoints, all those sort of things. They generalize really well across all trials. So the insights that you can learn from, say, a parallel condition that might be well studied can be used in rare conditions. So what we actually, as an experiment, what we did is we said, how well does our model actually predict for trials that have been done in rare conditions where there's been 50 or less studies in a condition, or maybe 100 or less studies in a condition? How well does TrialKey perform? Because that's the ultimate test, right? So we conducted this analysis, and I was kind of shocked. It turned out in phase 2 trials, our model actually predicts slightly better in rarer conditions than it does for well-studied conditions. Yeah, and I'm trying to figure this out in my head. The best sort of clue that I've got is that maybe in this case, the researcher doesn't know a lot because it's a rare condition, and our model is generalizing across all of the hundreds of thousands of trials that it's built on, the training set, and can actually come up with protocol designs that are more efficient than what the researcher knows at that level. For phase 3 trials, they're about the same level of accuracy. Maybe the researcher has learned a little bit more. I'm just speculating, but I was very pleasantly surprised to see that TrialKey performs well when designing trials in rare conditions.
I suppose building on that, how do you validate that the accuracy of the AI and
is another great question. So unfortunately, we haven't been around long enough that we could design hundreds and hundreds of trials using our TrialKey design that have gone through 2 or 3 years of clinical research, and we know what the results are, right? That unfortunately, AI tech and our tech hasn't been around that long. So the best we can do is build a model on a particular window of time, right? And let's say we build a model from data from 2000 to 2019. And then we predict, okay, what would happen to all the trials that have completed since 2019 that we know the results of, right? It's called out-of-sample testing. So we train a model, we predict into that, out-of-sample set that the model wasn't trained on and see how accurate it was. And then there's all these accuracy measures that are common in machine learning, like area under the curve or precision recall or mean squared error. So there's standard metrics that we look at, and then we judge how accurate our model is based on this out-of-sample testing. That's like the gold medal standard for validating machine learning models.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's really fascinating to hear. And another aspect of using AI, especially in the medical space, is ethical and responsible use.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's probably because I've just had training on it.
Okay.
And yeah, again, we know with AI, sometimes it's not perfect. There can be hallucinations and things like that.
Yeah.
What stopgaps have you guys built into TrialKey to prevent that? And yes, we've talked about the out-of-sample testing, but curious to hear your insight.
Can I go on a rant for 30 seconds and then answer your question?
Yes, please.
So this question about ethics comes up all the time. I'm going to put a counter argument here that it's almost unethical not to use a product like TrialKey, to put a patient population through a trial that's set up to fail, right? That doesn't make any sense to me. So when you talk about ethics, and you have ethics committees that look at clinical trials before they get approved, surely they should have an unbiased data-driven metric that shows what the chance of success is, right? And maybe that trial could be modified up front, not to put that patient population unnecessarily through a trial. That's my rant. I'm done. Okay. Now,
That was 30 seconds spot on.
that was pretty good. Now, to address the concerns about ethics. So yes, our training set is based on the entire history of medical research, globally. All right. Okay, but there's problems, right? Because that research may be reluctant to go into emerging economies and third world countries, etc. So there's an inherent bias in that data set. I actually think that machine learning has the best prospects of fixing these sorts of issues because humanity hasn't solved it. Like, we're training on a biased training set because we've been biased, right? So is it the AI that's creating the unethical issue, or is it the fact that we've been unethical for decades and decades and decades? So I want to just reframing that narrative. I think that AI has the potential to correct some of these biases by, let's say, a simple example is you might want to be looking to have sites in a third world country, but no one's ever run a trial in this particular area. Well, what are the key, economic measures for this area? And is there a similar one that your algorithm can identify where trials actually have been run? And therefore, can your algorithm suggest new locations that have never been tried before that might look similar to other sites that have been actually used? So I think AI has the best chance of correcting our inherent biases. So I have real issues with where people bring up ethical issues in our particular use case, because I think we have more chance of solving them than actually creating them. But it is an AI algorithm, and the output is not infallible. So we have clinicians and subject matter experts that do look at the output and validate it. And often we're working with pharmaceutical companies or biotechs, and they have their experts on their side. So our experts talk to their experts, and it's a collaboration. So we're not just using the machine learning output as given. It's being validated by subject matter experts as well.
Yeah, that's so good to hear that there is the stopgap. And I think that's the big piece around using AI, that it's such a powerful tool, but it's important to have someone maybe sense check.
Absolutely.
No hallucinations.
No hallucinations.
Yeah. And so, yeah, guys, you can see this is really fascinating technology. AI in healthcare is moving fast. So if you know someone in pharma or medtech and want them to stay ahead of the curve, please share this video with them. I'm sure they're going to take value from it. Now, we've talked about some of the cost savings for pharma in terms of avoiding a failed trial.
Yep.
How else does TrialKey's ability to identify risks and opportunity translate to cost savings for pharmaceutical products and pharma devices?
Yeah, so some of the key outputs that we produce have a direct impact on costs, like patient numbers, for example. So the traditional way that a pharmaceutical company will decide on how many patients they need for a trial is they'll get what's called a biostatistician, who will, based on a number of assumptions, will come up with a sample size that has enough power to get efficacy, right? So our approach is a different one. We use real-world evidence from actual clinical trials run for similar indications, the same or similar indications in the same phase. And based on that real-world evidence, our model will come up with what we call an optimal range for each of the variables in a clinical trial, like, for example, recruitment. So our model might say you need 150 to 200 patients. That they might have had their biostatistician come back and say you need 400 patients. So that starts a discussion with the biostatistician. Well, maybe I got some of these assumptions wrong, or maybe I didn't. But our data can be used as an extra point data point when decisions are being made to aid in that process. And each patient costs about $50,000 to $100,000. Yeah, so if there's a massive cost saving there. The other thing that we look at is how long should a trial run for? What are the optimal timeframes to evaluate endpoints? And it varies between phase and condition and drug mechanism and all sorts of things. But our model will optimize and say, okay, the best time to evaluate a primary endpoint, the initial evaluation might be 3 months, and then the final evaluation 12 months. Whereas they might have originally had it as 18 months as their. So you can really reduce. Sometimes the recommendations reduce the amount of time that a trial runs for. And the other thing I would say is if you get your protocol right up front, there's less alterations that you have to do in the future, right? If you're not, if your trial isn't tracking well, you have to go through ethics committees and all sorts to get your protocol amended. But if you get it right up front, that saves time and money as well.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds super exciting. Less patient numbers is big cost saving and faster time to approval. And if the design is right, yeah, we could see some real transformative therapies come to serve patients much faster than.
Yeah, it's interesting on patient numbers because everyone talks about patient numbers. Lots of trials also are under recruiting as well. So they need more patients according to our model. But we provide a cost benefit analysis. Say, okay, if you get an extra 50 patients, that's going to increase your success rate by about 7%. And then you can make an informed decision based on a cost benefit analysis. It's going to cost us this much extra, but it's improving our success rate by this. And then, you can make an internal decision around what you want to do.
Yeah. I like that sort of putting numbers to it, and to our earlier episodes on how we decide or how you might decide on whether to pursue a business opportunity is delving deeper. Okay, what is the you would have to do a cost benefit analysis, I'm sure.
Yeah. And our approach is purely data driven. There's no opinion in our approach, so it really can be sort of an unbiased tool out there that really helps decision making.
Yeah, so cool. And my final question on TrialKey, we alluded to 90% of research compounds do fail, unfortunately. What is TrialKey's ability to create digital twins? And for those who don't know what a digital twin is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, my understanding is it sort of will emulate a trial so that it doesn't actually have to be done. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Is that something in the works already capable?
Yeah, so with a particular trial design, once you've got a protocol that you're set on, or after we've optimized a protocol, what we can actually do is simulate that protocol 100,000 times. And then instead of just getting like an estimate of what the chance of success is, say 30%, right? Yep. We'll actually draw out a probability distribution of 95% confidence interval, which helps in risk management. So, your 95% confidence interval might be a really big one based on the simulation. If it's a new and emerging therapy or drug or something like that. But if we've got a lot of data on it when we run these simulations, sometimes you get quite a tight interval. So so we simulate these trials 100,000 times, but we can also simulate your closest competitors' trials 100,000 times as well, and see where, how well your trial is designed relative to your competitors and what percentile you're in. This is like with the power of modern day, cloud processing. This is now very, very possible and very real, and we do it all the time.
Yeah, wow, that's so cool. I would love to see.
The dog's just come back from his walk.
What's his name?
This is Willy the Whipper. Willy Whipper.
Willy Whipper. Welcome to the channel. So as you can see, AI is already transforming clinical trials. But this is just the beginning. Click here for part 4 as we look at the bigger picture and how AI is not only transforming clinical trials, but industries and jobs as a whole. If you don't watch this, you'll be 5 years behind once the changes hit. So stay ahead of the curve, and I'll see you there.